Hi, accounting students. This is Mrs. Blomquist, and we are currently looking at Chapter 7. Chapter 7 deals with the creation of financial statements for a proprietorship. And so in 7.1 here, we're going to be looking at preparing an income statement. In 7.2, we're going to be looking at preparing a balance sheet. Now, you'll remember back in Chapter 6, we looked at creating the worksheet where we used adjustments and came up with the trial balance, and then we ended up getting the information that we need for our income statement and our balance sheet. So as we move into lesson 1 here, one of the things that you'll want to think about is why businesses actually create financial statements. And the purpose of financial statements is so that you have a snapshot look at the financial health of a business, and to just really recognize that that's what this is all about. We want to have some documentation about the financial setup or the financial health of a business. And so looking at the income statement, looking at the balance sheet is going to help us do that. So 7.1, there are 2 learning objectives. The first one is actually going to be to prepare that income statement. And the second then is going to be to calculate and analyze some financial ratios using the information we see on the income statement. So one of the things to really just keep in mind, income statement definitely gives us a bottom line about how much money the business is bringing in. One thing we want to definitely remember that these financial reports that we're creating, they have an audience, okay? And they're created for different audiences, okay? So the definitions that we're looking at here, the area of accounting that focuses on reporting information to external users, this is financial accounting. When you're focusing on information for internal users, now you're talking about managerial accounting, and really realizing that the reports that are being created have a different audience, okay? So the other thing that you want to really try to bring back to the front here is that in Chapter 1, remember how we created those net worth statements? Well, the financial equivalent to that in a business is an income statement, and it's really looking at what's going on with the business in that way. Okay, so as we're moving forward here, really we want to make sure that we're remembering that the income statement is reporting information for a specific period of time. So whenever we're looking at an income statement, we always want to check the information that's up at the top of the actual income statement, the who, the what, the when, to make sure that we're really focusing and paying attention to the fact that this is a time-based situation. All right. The data that we need to prepare our income statement, though, we already calculated all that data. We already found all the data. It's right on the worksheet we just finished preparing in the last chapter. So as we look at the worksheet that we prepared, we can see in the income statement column that we have our information from sales, and we have our information about our expenses, money coming in, money going out, tied to income, tied to our revenue generating activities. Okay, so as we're looking at that income statement, the information that we need comes straight off of the worksheet. So heading on our income statement, we just want to remember we're working with Delgado Web Services. The report we're looking at is the income statement, and the time period is for the month that ended January 31st. All right, so now as we move forward and are starting to gather our information, we're looking at our revenue, which was from sales, and our expenses, and then we get our net income. So revenue minus expenses equals net income. Now, there's a whole lot of information right here on this slide, and as we look at it, we broke up all of our expenses. Notice that those are in alphabetical order. We totaled our expenses so that we could deduct those expenses from our sales to get net income. Notice that we no longer have a debit and credit situation going on our income statement. You don't see the headers for debit and credit on the actual income statement. Okay, so the next part comes in when we want to actually take the data from our income statement and analyze it, or look at it and try to figure out what does it mean. We want to have some kind of understanding that there are a couple of terms that we want to focus in on here, and there are three of them: the financial ratio, a ratio analysis, and a vertical analysis. So comparing two components of financial information, this is a financial ratio. Calculating and interpreting financial ratios is called a ratio analysis. So once you have those ratios, once you start to compare them to each other, now you're analyzing them. And then finally, reporting an amount on a financial statement as a percentage of another item is called a vertical analysis. And there are times when we really want to be looking at things we see on the income statement and in relation to or in comparison to another item. So we might want to be comparing expenses as they relate to our sales and to see how much of our sales can go to certain expenses. All right, so analyzing an income statement, let's look at the one we just prepared. I can see that revenue from sales is 58.20, but as a percentage of sales, all of our revenue is coming from sales. If we had revenue coming from other sources, we might be interested to know how much of our revenue is being generated from sales versus some other source that we might have. Okay. Then we looked at our total expenses to say that our total expenses are 45.7 or 45%. Okay. So once we're looking at where we have this information, one thing that we want to consider is that once we start calculating these ratios or analyzing this information, it doesn't mean a whole lot unless we know other ratios that we can actually compare ours to. So in business terms, we're looking at a web services business, and there are tons of industry reports out there that can tell us how other web service industries are doing, and we can figure out, hey, is our business performing at the average, above the average, below the average? And it gives us a sense of how we're doing as a company when you compare us to other companies in the same industry. And so that's really the important reason why we want to actually analyze this data. So we want to make sure, and there's some great information on page 196 in your book, and I would encourage you as you're looking at some of this information to really dial in on the return on sales piece that's on page 196. Okay, so we're seeing a total expense ratio where we take total expenses divided by total sales, and you can see that total expense ratio is 45.7%. So our net income ratio is 54%. Again, we don't really know if that means anything yet because we're not really sure how other web service businesses are doing. We might be well above industry average, we might be below industry average. All right, so now the next thing we're going to look at is the income statement with two sources of revenue and a net loss. So we are specifically dividing up our revenue into two sales categories here, riding mowers and push mowers. And we looked at our expenses, and it looks like our expenses exceeded our sales. This resulted in a net loss for us. Now, just to be clear, this business is Repair It Now. It is not Delgado Web Services. So our folks doing web design did not suddenly branch out and start selling some lawnmowers here. Okay, so as we're thinking through some questions we might want to be considering here, 4 sections of the income statement, okay, the 4 sections of the income statement. And as you're thinking through the answer to this question, please remember to start at the very top, okay? So when we start at the very top to think about sections of the income statement, we would consider that we need to include the heading, revenue, expenses, and then net income or net loss. Finally, let's look at formula for calculating total expenses ratio. And remember, ratio is where we're comparing one thing to another thing. Total expenses divided by total sales gives us total expenses. And if we're looking at net income divided by total sales equals our net income ratio. Now, I am going to remind you, you really want to look at page 196 where it talks about the net income ratio and the total expenses ratio, because there's more information than what I shared with you that I believe you will find incredibly helpful as you move forward. All right, from here, you're going to go ahead, fill out the forms. They should be relatively easy. You'll recognize the questions. Go ahead and pop into Applia and do the work together and on your own. And if you're feeling comfortable, I would encourage you to push right through to the application. Good luck.